This year, we've been trying to emphasize a little bit more some of the missions that we are involved in, as well as trying to create some environments where we can have better fellowship and we can spend time together so that we can encourage one another, we can grow in our faith, and through it all, we can be strengthened, not only individually, but collectively. And it's always good when sometimes opportunities like that come up where we don't really have to do a lot of work for it. And so one of them is coming up next weekend, which is the steak and corn roast at the Church of Christ Care Center. So that's one mission we're involved in. And if you're familiar with it, it kind of started in this area years ago. And I don't know if there's some people still around that remember when it was started, but it was, over 75 years ago. So it's been a while. But we are involved in it a little bit financially. Some people go out and serve there. Jerry leads a group out there once every couple months to participate and lead the worship services on a Sunday afternoon. Some people go out to the steak and corn roast, which is next weekend. There's a golf classic in the fall. So I know there's different ways that people are involved. We've had several members here. I don't believe there's anyone currently there, but people that have been there either in the nursing home or in the assisted living or in the senior housing. And so the church here has been involved with that. And this is kind of also not only an opportunity to support it financially, but also, to spend time with others, not only our church family, but usually there's maybe 300 people there from mostly church people. You don't have to be a Church of Christ member to attend, but it's mostly church members, and so it's an opportunity to be together and just enjoy fellowship. But you have to buy a ticket, and so I'll just throw it out right now. Like, tickets are, at this point, because you're a little late on the early bird price, $90 each. But if you want to come and cannot afford the full amount, talk to me. I got a deal for you. So we can work something out. We don't want anybody to say it's just way too much, can't come. We'll work something out with you. Maybe put you on a payment plan. No, I'm just kidding. We can come up with some money to help out, so that's not a problem. Also, the week after that, in case that's just not enough fellowship or you want a different kind of fellowship, we're also involved quite a bit with the camp. And again, there's several guys here that are on the board at camp. Our youth go in the summer. Our ladies are having a ladies retreat. Check your bulletin for the date on that. It's the last weekend in September. Ladies retreat up at the camp. There's a winter camp where our teens go to that as well. There's a men's retreat in the spring, and so there's a lot of different activities going on at the camp. So we support that, especially we've been working on Dorm 2. So if you can come up to the camp in 2 weeks, I know Mark mentioned that at the beginning, but I'm trying to explain why it would be a good idea to go, to see what we're involved in, the work that's been done, and it's a good time, again, for us to hang out together, spend time together, get to know each other, and share our lives together, around some outdoor activities and fun and maybe a nature walk. And the thing we love the best, food, of course. Can't have, do any of these events ever happen without food, But anyway, food is great, but the fellowship is even greater. So again, this is the purpose and the reason why we're doing this. And then things like, the last Wednesday of the month, we have fellowship before Bible class. This summer, the last Sunday night of the month, Sunday evening, we have like a devotional down in the fellowship hall. And well, since we're down there anyway, we couldn't do that without food. So we got to have more food, so we have food. And so food helps, I think, sometimes create fellowship. One day maybe I'll do a whole lesson on that. It's kind of called hospitality. When you invite people into your home and you share a meal, you're actually also sharing your life. And that opens up all kinds of doors you will not get going out and having a Big Mac at McDonald's with a friend. It's just different. I can't explain why it is. There's something psychological about it when you're together and eating, especially in the intimate environment of your own home. You're not only opening your home, you're opening your heart. So that's a whole nother lesson. Since I already have a lesson today, we'll get into the lesson for today. Well, a couple of weeks ago, about 6 weeks ago now, I think 5 or 6 weeks ago, we did a survey, asked the congregation several different questions about some ideas that they may have, some suggestions. And one of the questions had to do with, what could we speak on that would be helpful, that would be inspiring, that maybe a question you had or a concern you had. And so we've been looking through those, and at least I have. I know the elders have it, and we're going to distribute and let you know some of the other things. But one of the things that comes up fairly frequently is just kind of the whole idea of morality. And so I do want to spend a couple of weeks talking, about 3 weeks right now in August, talking about morality. Today's just kind of the beginning point of what morality really is, and when we look at it and think about it from a biblical perspective, how that impacts us, how that should change us, that it is a whole lot more than just like external rules. Okay, so we've got that in our society, the civil laws by the local government, the state government, the federal government. They've got laws, and all those are external. None of those are really designed to somehow change your heart or change your attitude or change your feeling, about the laws that they make. They're just saying there's laws, there's consequences, just follow them. All those things we would say are external, trying to work their way in. God has something much different in mind for those people that have surrendered to Christ. It's internal. It starts on the inside. And sometimes when it starts on the inside, you can't see a whole lot on the outside, nothing's really happening, but it starts on the inside and works its way out. And so that's what changes our life, an internal transformation of the heart, of the will, of the mind, of the emotion, everything who we are surrenders to God, and it changes who we are. And that's the difference in morality between kind of what the world is pushing and what God is insisting on for those people that would be His. What does this look like? What are we talking about? Because, a lot of times in our society, the morals shift, don't they? The ethics, the ideals, the things that we say, well, this is really important. This is essential. This is a part of life. This is a part of who we are. Maybe as an American or as a Christian nation, if we can, at one time we called ourselves that, but probably not anymore. But what is this well, it can change so quickly. At one time, there are things that we do today that are legal now, and getting to the point of almost being illegal to talk negatively about, that at one time we would say, well, that is wrong. And there were even laws on the books that said it's wrong, and it's punishable, and you should not be living that way or acting that way. And now, well, things have changed. And so people say, well, if society changes, our culture has changed, and our laws have changed, so it's okay then. So we just kind of shift along based on popular opinion, or maybe a few people in Washington, or some lobby groups that are pushing hard, or whatever the agenda of the moment is. I mean, is that how we decide what's right and wrong? Well, and how do we respond to that? How do we combat that? And what exactly would we teach? And this is kind of what I want to look at today is what about these morals? What are we really talking about? What does God really want? So we're familiar maybe in the Old Testament with what we would call some morals, and the Ten Commandments would be one. There's a lot of different ways that God communicated with people of what His will is and was, and what He wanted them to do and how He wanted them to live. One of them was the Ten Commandments. Now, if you're following closely in the Old Testament, it's not like God said, here are 10 commandments. If you follow these, you can have a relationship with me. That's not the 10 Commandments. The 10 Commandments started with God. I mean, this is well before the 10 Commandments, but context. God made a promise to Abraham that He would have a covenant with him and his children and his descendants, and those people would come after them, and they were the Israelites or the Jewish people. They were in Egypt. They left Egypt, and God said, we have a relationship. You are my people. And He actually even said, do you want to have a covenant with me? And the people said, yes, we do. And God said, well, that's great. Let's have covenant. Let's have this relationship. I'll take care of you. You do what I say. Because I want to bless you. I want to guide you. I want what's best for you. So I'm going to have some things for you to do and to act, and the way you should live, and the way you should treat people, and the way you should worship. All those things have to do with this relationship they already have. And this was for the people of God. This is kind of what God does with us. This is kind of what the New Testament is about. The New Testament isn't about a lot of laws that we are supposed to impose on people that have no interest in serving the Lord. Jesus says, these are things, if you want to be my disciple, this is how you live. And so it's kind of funny that sometimes we've kind of gone from one extreme and swung to the other extreme. And when I talk about extremes, I mean this. When God says about how we should live, a lot of Christians are trying to impose that on unbelievers. And yet God is saying, well, this is how you should live when you are a follower, you are a Christian, or you are a disciple. This is how you should live. And yet a lot of times we even look at that and say, well, we're not even really trying to expect that even from our own church members. So if we are the Israelites, God's people, let's say, I'm using an analogy here, I know you're not Israelites, but spiritual Israel perhaps, we're in a covenant with God. God has told us how we ought to live, and sometimes we just look over, or we ignore, or we give people a pass when they're not even trying to live according to His law, according to the principles, according to even a covenant that God made with us as New Testament Christians. We are in this relationship. And so even a lot of the things of the New Testament are not to be enforced or demanded from people that are not Christians. It's once you are a believer, once you've submitted to Christ, once you put Him on in baptism and said, I've surrendered my life to Christ, then you start living that way because your life is now changed. And so it does begin to change when we think about what God wants. So this is what 1 John chapter 4 says about the question. Dear friends, let us love one another, for love comes from God. And everyone who loves has been born of God and knows God. Whoever does not love does not know God, because God is love. So the idea is, and we sang the songs about more holiness give me, or, I want to be more like Christ. I want to be more like God. And that's our goal, to be more like God. Well, what is God like? And sometimes we may even lose really what this verse is saying. This is not really saying that God is loving or God loves. Saying God is love. Love is not, I would have to say, just something God does. It's not just how He feels. It's not just an action. It's not just an emotion. It's who He is. Like if He stopped loving to the fullest extent like He does love, He'd no longer be God. He'd be giving up Himself. Does that make sense? What does God want us to be? He doesn't want us just to be more loving or more kind or more that's something you can work on maybe tangibly. But He wants us to be like Himself. He wants us to be people of love. In our soul, in our heart, in our essence is who we are. It's not just what we do. Does that make sense? Because if it's just something you do, it's like, I love these stupid church people again. Well, it's my duty. It's my cross. I got to bear it. I'm just trying to be faithful. God knows all the help I need all the help I can get. Right? No, but love is who we are. That I want to love because God's changed me into a loving person. Now, I agree that a lot of times we do need God to tell us, what does that really look like in plain language? And so He has to say things like, well, be compassionate and be patient and be gentle and be sympathetic and show some mercy. And so He's got to use all these things to explain, like, really what does love look like? But hey, if we were just loving, I think we could figure that out on our own. Maybe we're not as loving as we ought to be, so we do need, some definition of what does love look like in everyday life. But God is love. And so when we talk about morality, when we talk about purity, when we talk about holiness, if we talk about righteousness, what does that mean? It means it needs to be who we are, not just what we do. Like, I want to be an honest person because that's who I am. It's not just because, I don't want to destroy a relationship. I don't want to hurt somebody else. I don't want to be known as somebody who's a deceiver. I want to do what's right. I probably would be a thief, except, if I got caught, and you think what that would be, and people, Actually, I don't think I would be, just in case you're wondering. Anyway, so why do we do what we do? Just so we don't get caught? Just so we don't bring shame upon ourselves? just so we're not a disappointment to our mom and dad? Just because I need to be an example to the younger kid? Why is it? Is it because of who we are? Or is it just because there's a lot of trouble we can get into? And I want to use an example in just a little bit of someone that really did have these kinds of challenges in his own life, and he was able to overcome. 2 Timothy chapter 2 and verse 13 says this about God. It talks about that we need to be faithful, but if we're not faithful, God remains faithful because he cannot disown himself. It's not just, well, God made a covenant, he made a promise to be faithful. God is really serious about keeping his word. God has so much compassion and love for us, of course he's going to be faithful. It's saying this is who God is. So the idea of why would we be faithful? Because we want to be like God. We want that to be who we are. So I no longer have to work so hard at being faithful because I am faithful. And that's a new way of looking at it for some people. Especially if you have a challenging past. Well, I've been somebody that's been very angry in the past. Or I've been somebody who's been very untrustworthy in the past. Or I've been somebody who's been untruthful in the past. And that becomes a part of our identity. And so all we're trying to do is to work on better behavior. Now, sometimes we may need that. But hopefully we can grow to the point where we have this relationship with God, and God is in us, and he transforms who we are, not just what we do. It's not just what we say. It's not even just what we think. It's who we are. That we are holy, we are redeemed, we are righteous, we are set apart, we are living for Jesus. It's my identity. And then perhaps there's less work in having to make all these decisions on a day-by-day basis. Well, I'm not going to go by my emotions today because I'm going to go by who I am, not by what I feel. I'm going to live according to who I've been called, not based on, the peer pressure that's around me. I'm not going to allow society or culture or political environment and the laws of the land shape who I am, because that's not who I am. So I can confidently say to you today, that I'm not an American. You probably already knew that because I'm Canadian. But that's not what I'm trying to say, right? What I'm trying to say, I'm a Christian. My relationship is with Jesus. My citizenship is in heaven. Now, you can live here in America and still be an American, but that's not your identity. That's your locality. Your identity is you're a Christian. That's like number one. Now, you have responsibility to the law of the land and society and the people that live here in your neighborhoods. That's a part of being a Christian. But number one, it's the relationship I have because I have surrendered my life to God. So God is always going to remain faithful. So what it looks like this for somebody who's growing to maturity, and certainly I'm not there yet, but still trying to grow, that it's not all just external. Like, what if we could say this? 1 John says it. There is no fear in love. There's no fear in love. He goes on to say, because fear has to do with punishment. Well, I know I can be released from the fear of God, the fear of punishment that may come from God. But did you ever get to the point when you were growing up? So you're a little kid, and your parents told you to do something. Maybe what you did was fear of consequences, fear of getting into trouble, fear of having a timeout. Back in the day, there was such a word as spanking or something. So maybe in a fear, you had fear. I have fear, so I'm not going to go against my parents' wishes. So what they say I will do because I'm a fear of consequences. What if there is no fear in love, and this is the fear? It's not what God is going to do to me when I sin. It's what I'm going to do to him. I'm so fearful that when I am not living the way God wants me to live, I'm going to break his heart. Fear of the relationship. I just want the relationship to be pure and to be whole. I want it to be true. I want it to be authentic. I want it to be open. I don't want to be hiding from God. I don't want to be playing games with God. I don't want to be justifying my life before, well, God, you just don't understand. I'm kind of weak, and it was really somebody else's fault, and, I just couldn't say no. I just want to please God. That seemed to be Jesus' motive. He just was seeking after the Father's will. Why? Because God was living in him. I mean, he was God. But what was he doing? He was seeking the will of his Father. Because he treasured that relationship. And that's what he was seeking after. So, kind of in a roundabout way, a couple of verses. This is what was read a little bit earlier by Jansen in Mark 7. See, it's from within. It's in the heart. It's inside. It's in the mind. It's in our will. And at some point, it may even becomes, like I say, who we are. It's almost a natural thing for people to act this way. Why are people going so crazy in the world? So in the next couple of weeks, just to give you a heads up, one thing I do want to talk about is the sanctity of life. And that's going to include abortion, but it's going to include a whole lot more about how we value or even disvalue life, human life. And then I also want to talk about sexuality. What people think of sexuality. Because it's from within. Starts on the inside, works its way out. It's in the man's heart. That's where the evil thoughts come. Things like what? What are you talking about? Sexual immorality? From theft, murder, adultery, greed, malice, deceit, lewdness, envy, slander, arrogance, and folly. All these things, they come from the inside. Now, this is exactly what Jesus addressed in the Sermon on the Mount, didn't he? Sometimes he'd say, it's not just murdering people that's wrong, but you hate your brother in your heart. Because that's what this is saying. It's the evil thought. You've not necessarily acted on it yet, but some people are murderers just in their heart. And if that's where it's at, keep it there. Don't act out on it. That would be even worse. But how do we change the inside? This is what we're talking about, changing who we are. How does that happen? How does that work? It's got to be a transformation from the inside out. So this is what it looks like in the life of a man named Joseph. Joseph was a young man. He was favored by his father, hated by his brother. He was sold to the Midianites. He was ended up in Egypt, and he was working for Potiphar, who was very high up in the land, a very grand position. He wasn't yet the Pharaoh, but he was somebody that had a lot of power. So Potiphar left in Joseph's care everything he had. With Joseph in charge, he did not concern himself with anything except the food he ate. And so Potiphar was very powerful, and Joseph was right underneath him. Potiphar said, I trust you. Could you imagine that? A young man that's a foreigner, you really don't know that well. I don't know what kind of background checks they could have done back then, or Google searches, or maybe check his Facebook account. I mean, how do you find out? But evidently he showed himself to be somebody of a wonderful character and disposition. That Potiphar said, I'll put you in charge of everything I've got. I trust it all to you. That's a lot of power for a young man. Anybody here in their 20s, or maybe you're a little older than that, but you remember in your 20s, you think you could have handled that power? Ooh, that'd be difficult, wouldn't it? I mean, what happens sometimes when you're young, you get lots of power? Wow, I really am all that. I am pretty smart. I am pretty strong. I am pretty powerful. Right? and I'm single. But he had worse problems than that he was single. Here's the next problem he had. He was well-built and handsome. I mean, he was buff and he was cute, right? Young guy, powerful, good-looking, got some muscle going on. Wow. I really am all that. I mean, wouldn't you think that most people would react that way? I mean, I could have whatever I want. And even if something happened, I could always work my way around it. I could deny it. I could get an alibi. I could pay somebody off. I mean, there's ways to do what you want to do, and nobody ever knows. So he does have it all. But the problem being in this position, let me just think again. Young, powerful, rich, good-looking, and buff. I've never had that problem. Okay. So, but the problem with that is, I mean, because that's what some people think, right? You know, I'm a young guy, you know, I wish I was strong, get the muscles, and, you know. I don't know, are you supposed to say this in church, but be a chick magnet, okay? You got it? But there are struggles with that, right? So again, I kind of grew up a little dopey, daft, and unattractive. Okay? So I didn't have that problem with people, oh, you know, wow, no. But he had a lot of temptation in his life. Sometimes that would be brought upon by his own perspective and his own thinking and his own wishful things and dreams and ideals. But now Potiphar's wife took notice of him. Again, it wasn't probably just that he was handsome and buff, but that he was also powerful. But maybe it was because he was a man of integrity. And sometimes that's hard in our society today, whether you're young or older. Sometimes people be like, well, let me see if I can, you know, attempt or to attract or to deceive or to demoralize. Oh, that person's a Christian. Boy, that'd be quite a challenge. That would take quite a bit of, you know, power and influence and maybe a little bit of suave on my behalf to try to seduce somebody into sin. But this is what she kept doing. Now, the thing with temptation, this kind of got to do with morality, it's got to do with ethics, now this is sexual in nature. But James describes it this way: each one is tempted when by his own evil desire. See, a lot of times we just think, you know, I was so pure in heart and pure in mind. All of a sudden, somebody came along and implanted all these ideas and thoughts in my mind I'd never thought of before. Well, I'm sure you've lied about other things as well, because that's not the way it works. It starts in your mind. And then you are able to hear what other people are saying and attract people around you that are going to tell you what you want to hear and, you know, the society which you're in. Does that make sense? So somebody who's struggling with being an alcoholic and yet also struggling with having an affair on his wife, and he's like, I don't know what happened. I wasn't even thinking. Next thing you know, I just kind of drove myself to the local bar where there's a lot of loose women, and we just all got to drinking. I don't know how that happened. Well, yeah, you decided that's where you wanted to be, and I'm thinking you just didn't go there because you wanted a hamburger and a glass of water, right? You went there because you had thoughts in your mind, and you've attracted now other people to bring this on. But this was not the case with Joseph. He was just working in that she was tempting him. As a matter of fact, with this idea, his own evil desire, he's dragged away and enticed. Evidently, sometimes you can get to the point where you've crossed the line and there's almost no turning back. Then after desire is conceived, it gives birth to sin, and sin, when it's full grown, gives birth to death. All right, so here's the challenge. This is how he resisted. First of all, he realized that he is in charge. He has power. Not only does he have power over the house, over what Potiphar has given him, he says, I have power over my own life. And I can decide what's best for me and what I should be doing, what is right, and I'm going to choose what's right. My master trusts me. I've been faithful to him, and he has given to me all the power that he has. And there's no one greater in the house, except Potiphar, you would say, beside me. I mean, I do have this power. And with that power comes responsibility. All right, so that's something very important to keep in mind, because sometimes when you're being tempted, it is because you have power over somebody else or power over a situation. You got to realize that with that power is responsibility. Fourthly, you are his wife. You've got this relationship. This would be wrong. It would be immoral. So this is not going to happen because you are married and you are my master's wife. He says it's a wicked thing. It'd be a wicked thing for me to commit adultery with you. And perhaps it was even accepted in their society back then, but it would just be a wicked thing to do. But this is the big thing, is that it would be a sin against God. It would not just be a sin against Potiphar. It would not be a sin against just this woman. It would not just be a sin against myself. It would not just be a sin against my father, who lives many miles away, doesn't even know I'm alive, but it'd be a sin against my family and against my culture. Maybe it'd be a sin against all the Jewish people and against Abraham himself. No, that's not the big deal. Big deal, this is a sin against God. I follow God, I love God, I have a relationship with God, and I'm not sinning against God. You see, if you think, well, I don't want to sin and hurt other people, you can think, well, there's a way to cover this thing up. I mean, there's a way to do this, nobody's going to find out. Have you ever sinned and it was just kind of between you and God? Like literally nobody else knows because it was done in your mind. It was done when you were by yourself and no one knows. Well, who does that hurt? Well, that hurts you and your relationship with God, but it also hurts people around you. Well, they don't know, but it still hurts relationship. It hurts the community. It hurts who you are. It hurts who you are becoming. So sinning against God, he's saying, I am not going to do that. She spoke to Joseph day after day. That's one thing about temptation. It doesn't just happen once. Have you ever found that? I mean, you can say no once, maybe you can say no 2 or 3 times, but when it keeps coming back over and over and over again, and again, sometimes the challenge is, what do you do between the temptations? Well, yeah, I'm a pretty good-looking guy. Yeah, I've kind of been through a lot in my life. I've been through a lot of struggles. Finally, things are working out. Don't I deserve a little bit of enjoyment in my life? I mean, would it really be that wrong? I think other people are doing it, and nobody's got to find out. And like, what are you thinking? What do you dream about? What do you fantasize about between? Now, again, it could be anything. You remember the list we read? It could be greed. It could be desiring something else. It could be a position. It could be power. It could be money. It could be a relationship with, whether you hate somebody or you got revenge or you're mad or just the way you interact with people. So she caught him by his cloak and said, come to bed with me. And yet he left his cloak behind in her hand. He ran out of the house. So we close with this because time is just moving along. Flee. This is what he does. And so this lesson from Joseph is a personification of what Paul tells to Timothy. Flee. What do you flee? The evil desires of youth. Now, he doesn't really get really specific here, but Joseph was a young guy at this point. And certainly he had desires, but he was able to flee from the evil desires of youth. But just running away is not enough. So what are we going to do? If we're going to run away from something, no matter what direction you run, if you're running from, you've got to be running to something. So he's going to tell us what we run to, what we're trying to become, where we want to be when we're done running. Maybe the idea is we're running our entire life, this race that is set before us. Pursue righteousness. Pursue faith. Pursue love, peace, and along with those who call on the Lord out of a pure heart. That's kind of interesting, isn't it? It's kind of got a lot wrapped up in here. Pursue these things. We're running away from the evilness, the wickedness, the unrighteousness of the world. We're running to these qualities of God, which are found in the fruit of the Spirit. But you want to know something in this verse? Does he say you're running alone? No, he's saying you're running with other people. Well, what people are you running with? If you spend your whole time running with people that are running in the opposite direction, you're going to find this a struggle. But if you're running with people that also have the same goals, and they have the same direction, and they have the same plan, and they have the same destiny, and they have the same pace that you are running on, then you're going to be able to find strength, endurance, hope, comfort. When you get weary, somebody can help you along. When other people are struggling, you can be a source of strength for them. And it's kind of like together as a team. It's kind of like a family. You know, we could almost say it's kind of like church. And I thought church was just Sunday morning from 11 till 1:30. Just kidding. But it's not. It's relationship. It's together. We're in this trying to be like God because God lives in us. We're trying to allow the God, the Father, Jehovah, who lives in us, to come out of us in the way we live, the way we talk, the way we act, the way we think. Everything is centered on God. That's kind of what moral is. Being a moral person just means letting the God inside of me be the God on the outside of me, because I want to please Him. If we can encourage you today in your Christian walk, if today you say, I want that relationship to be in this race, to be committed to a relationship with a Father who loves me and cares about me, who seeks my welfare and seeks good and seeks life. If today you want to be baptized into Christ, let's stand, we'll sing this song, and let us know if we can be a blessing today.